I love to talk about calling with my students, in part, I think, because I teach in a pre-professional program here at Hope College, the education department, and we're nestled in a liberal arts college. So I love how I'm preparing students for a job, but really what I see my job as a professor at Hope is to prepare them for a life of calling, of being faithful to a calling. When I talk to students about calling, I always start by saying, who is doing the calling? I think when we talk about calling, we're assuming or implying that there is a caller. And as Christians, we believe that God is calling us to do and to be something in the world. And I like to talk with my students about how our primary calling is discipleship, is to be disciples of Christ, to glorify God in what we do and say and play and laugh and work hard at. And so I always like to start with that premise. And then out of that primary calling that we have to live and be disciples of Christ, what is it that God might be calling us to do in terms of our interests, in terms of our season of life, in terms of things that motivate us or open and close doors or previous experiences? How might God be calling us to live out what it means to be Christ's disciples in the world? So I love to talk about that in lots of different spheres. So to answer the question a little bit differently, calling does not equate career to me because I see calling as much bigger. Calling in lots of different spheres and different seasons of life as well. In that, we are called vocationally to our jobs. I love to talk to my education students how you are called to be teachers. You're pursuing that part of calling in your life. But as in my own life, I believe God has also called me to be a wife and a mom and a community member. And so I encourage my students to think about calling in that broader sense as well. One of the things that I say to students is to sit in it. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable. We're waiting for, I sometimes use the term vocational soulmate, where we think there's like one perfect vocational calling out there and it's up to us to discover it. And that is stressful. And my students get worried and they get nervous that they might pick the wrong one. And I always think that sounds like, that's a little bit like a fairy tale. I don't think there's a vocational soulmate. I think that our calling ebbs and flows and changes, sometimes in radical ways as we grow up and as we try different things. And so when students aren't sure, I always like to start by saying, let's talk a little bit about who you are and who God has gifted you to do and be. One of the things I love at Hope College is that we have all of our freshmen do the Strengths Finder. That helps give us language and a vocabulary and a framework for thinking about our strengths and our gifts. And I think those conversations can also lend into rich conversations about our limitations as well, about things that we find difficult or that we might not find that God is calling us to. And so often with students who are unsure, I just say, that's okay. That's in part why you are here at Hope College. Because I also believe that our students are called to be students right now at this time of life. It's such a privilege to be at Hope College and to be spending these years thinking about who we are as children of God and who and what God might be calling us into. So first of all, just having students know that it's okay and the messy is real, and you probably will be feeling sort of this ebb and flow about calling for the rest of your life. I don't think it's ever something we truly arrive at. I also think that it's important to, as we think about who we are, as we think about what motivates us, where our passions are, where our strengths are, I think a large part of it as well is to think about our previous experiences. I have a student who is a special ed major, and she has chosen special ed in part because her brother has Down syndrome. And that experience of being a sibling to someone who has Down syndrome has shaped her heart in such beautiful ways. I love seeing how God has been at work through these years of walking alongside and loving into and loving on and learning from her brother, that she now feels God prompting her to take what she's learned and to take her passion and her advocacy to bless and to speak into other people's lives. And so that's an example, I think, of when we're not sure about our calling, to reflect on and to consider some of our previous experiences and how God might be using some of those to help us live into or discern our calling. Another part of discernment that I encourage students to do, and they don't always love this part, but sometimes I say, let's look at open doors and closed doors in your life. And open doors are really exciting. Sometimes opportunities come along that we didn't expect, or sort of land in our laps, or just a gift. And I think some of discernment is in following those open doors through prayer and guidance and community members speaking into, proceeding through that open door. But on the converse, I think that God also speaks through closed doors. And that's hard. I had a student who was an education major. She taught for several years and really felt like God was calling her into graduate school. And really faithful in that whole process. She applied to graduate school and did not get in. And that was heartbreaking for her. She was angry. She was, didn't know what to do, so disappointed. And, just really at a crossroads saying, like, God, I thought this was the next best step for me to take, and this door has closed. She applied again the next year, and the door was still closed. And so walking alongside of her was hard. I didn't really have answers at that point other than, and I often say this to students, what might be the next best step for you? Don't think about 10 years down the road, but what is the best next step? And for her it was, as she was waiting to get into grad school again, and as she was exploring sort of what the new direction in the road might be, she applied at a local nonprofit. And this nonprofit did work with literacy and English learners. And she said, I was just going to do this for a year. She did it for a year, and then applied for grad school again, did not get in, another closed door, and then realized that this was where she really felt called to do. It's never something she would have anticipated, and it only came through a closed door. But happy to say she is still there and is still loving and finding joy. That's another part too, is listen to what gives you joy. Joy doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but life-giving things, next steps, I think, is something to listen to as well.